Sumalee Suekue. I am studying at Chiang Mai Rajabhat University in English major. Today I will bring you to know Australia, and now it's time to learn geography.
Australia is an island nation straddling the Indian Ocean basin and the South Pacific. Once a colony of the United Kingdom, the country began a move toward independence in 1901. Today, the Commonwealth of Australia encompasses the mainland of the Australian continent, Tasmania, and more than 8,000 other islands in the continent's surrounding waters. Australia's interior, known as the Outback, is mostly desert. This largely uninhabitable area is home to Australia's iron and coal reserves, among the world's largest. Mining has grown in importance for the Australian economy and remains a key driver of future economic growth. The Melbourne-Sydney-Brisbane corridor forms the population core along the fertile southeastern coastline, while the capital Canberra is situated in the interior, near the Murray-Darling River system. The Murray-Darling Basin is Australia's agricultural heartland, but is cut off from the core by the mountains of the Great Dividing Range. Australia's main geographic challenge is managing its isolation and small population, which is stretched thinly along its coasts. These factors affect almost all domestic and foreign policy decisions. Distance and isolation mean that Australia relies heavily on shipping lanes for its economic security. This has led Australia to build close alliances with global maritime powers, first the United Kingdom and later the United States, to protect its access to ocean trade as well as deter attacks from other powers. Increasingly, Canberra must balance its strategic, military, and cultural ties to the US and Europe with greater economic integration with East and Southeast Asia, and especially China, its largest trading partner.
And how about the geography of Australia? Next, we will move to history, policy, and religion of Australia.
So this is Australia. This is their flag, not to be confused with their neighbour New Zealand. It's 2016, and it's modern. It's got a famous rock, the Sydney Opera House, snakes, teddy bears, those things they ride into battle with, and spiders. Let's go back in time a little bit. Australia is here having a bit of Netflix and chill with the other continents. And it's got dinosaurs on it. Millions of years later, the long-term relationship ended, thanks to tectonic plates. Fucking bitches. So, for a long time, Australia is lonely until the ancestors of the indigenous people, they arrive using magic to cross onto the island. The indigenous people are, because they're still on the island, hunter-gatherers, and they brought art and culture to the island. Then the Dutch arrived, with William Jazoet being the first to land in 1606. However, some people say Portuguese dudes discovered it in 1521, and some other people say that Chinese dudes discovered it 2,500 years ago. Anyway, then other Europeans came to visit. Then Britain arrived and scared everyone else away because Britain had a massive navy and was like, go away, we own this now. So James Cook charted the east coast and claimed it for Britain, calling it New South Wales. Arthur Phillipps landed with 11 ships, and so began the colonisation of Australia. But with their landing came a wave of disease for the indigenous people. Many died from smallpox and other diseases. Also, Sydney was founded in the same year, and Australia got a phone call from the British, and they were sent something via Bluetooth. Over the years, Britain began colonising and expanding, driving out most of the indigenous people. They also introduced new animals, and a lot of them were killed by the British. Was there ever a war fought between the indigenous people and the British? Well, yes, in Tasmania, between 1820 and 1832. It was called the Black War, and around 200 Europeans and 600 to 900 indigenous people were killed. And the war tactics were similar to those used in Vietnam, also called guerrilla warfare. There weren't many wars fought between the indigenous people and the Europeans because the indigenous people lived in tribes all over the island and never really came together. Also, the British had guns and they had sticks. There were just a lot of massacres, and some indigenous people ended up joining the British colonists' way of life. The early British belief was that you could even breed out the black skin of the indigenous people that joined the British society, and thought that over the generations the half-caste would become white-skinned. In 1803, Australia became known as Australia, as before this time it was called New Holland. So, congratulations Australia! 5 years later, there was a rebellion called the Rum Rebellion, in which the governor of New South Wales was deposed by the military, who ruled for 2 years until the British arrived to form a new governor. Over the years, Australia took form and began forming its 6 states we see today: the states of New South Wales, South Australia, Queensland, Victoria, Western Australia and Northern Territory. Gold was discovered in many places, such as in Victoria and Queensland, which made people rich. And in 1887, in Western Australia, more was discovered, which made people more rich. In the same year, the first game of cricket was played between the British and the Australians in Melbourne. In 1901, Australia became a federation, with Edmund Barton becoming the first Prime Minister, and the waving of the Australian flag occurred. Times were great. Australia had the world's first feature film, and the tank was invented by Lancelot de Mol, and the radio was introduced. And then the Great War came along. But when World War I started, Australia went into immediate action. They sent troops to New Guinea and pushed Germany out and annexed it for themselves. Then Australia landed in Turkey and helped out in Europe. They even helped out in the Battle of the Somme on the Western Front, taking a lot of casualties. And when the war ended in 1918, over 60,000 Australians had lost their lives. But they were invited to the Treaty of Versailles and told to join the League of Nations. It will bring peace, they said. Australia were like, oh, peace? Oh, fuck yeah! Then Nazi Germany invaded Poland. Australia, you have to go to war. Ah, shit, said Australia. So in 1940, the Royal Australian Navy engaged the Italian Navy and won in the early stages of the Battle of the Mediterranean. Then the Australian Imperial Force engaged against Germany in Crete, Greece and North Africa and suffered defeat, and they were like, no. In the same year, the Aussie Prime Minister resigned, and a guy named Curtin came into government and appealed to America for help, as in 1942, Japan took Singapore, and 15,000 Australians became prisoners of war. Then air raids happened across Australia by the Rice Munchers, with almost 100 attacks on places in Northern Territory, Western Australia and Queensland. The bombings of Darwin were the largest attack by a foreign power. But it's not all bad. They stopped the Nazis advancing into major cities in Europe. And in August to September, the Australians won their first battle against the Imperial Japanese. And well, the war went on until 1945, when Germany surrendered in May. And then a few more months later, Japan surrendered in August. Around 27,000 Australian troops died in World War II. And so yeah, they got a bit more friendly with the USA instead of Britain, which meant they also entered the Korean War and helped out a little bit. And they also helped out in the Vietnam War a little bit. So I guess they were a bit sick of the British fighting with the tactics of throwing tea and crumpets at the enemy, and preferred the delights of American warfare, throwing KFC and McDonald's food at the enemy instead. Australia also introduced mixed mitosis into their country to control the rabbit population, which was a disease studied in Uruguay in the 19th century, which caused blindness and fever to kill rabbits. Oh, and Australia received 2 million immigrants between 1948 and 1975, mainly from Europe. And Papua New Guinea became independent in 1975, and well, the Sydney Opera House was finished in 1973, so...
nation of Australia.
The third painting in oil by a settler artist to show the Australian Aboriginal people, and the very first to depict the Palawa, the indigenous people of Tasmania. It was painted by Robert Neal, who was a commissariat officer serving in Van Diemen's Land and in the Swan River district. Neil was a keen amateur of natural history, and he sent specimens and drawings to correspondents in the UK. And his ethnographic interests were particularly marked. He illustrated Edward John Eyre's Journals of Exploration, for example. And there are 3 drawings in the Mitchell Library which show the Tasmanians. In this painting, you can see those ethnographic interests. A remarkable feature of the sale is that we have 2 works from Sidney Nolan's Annus Mirabilis of 1948, which reflect his recent explorations of outback Queensland. From June, we have Desert Bird. The bird of the title, like that in the Pretty Polly Mine or the Dog and Duck Hotel, reflects something of the artist's amateur enthusiasm for ornithology. But it is essentially a natural landscape, with the essence of the picture being an exploration of that extraordinary, luminous, opalescent Queensland wetlands. Remarkably, this picture has been in the one collection since it was first purchased the year it was painted. Then, from several months later, in November, we have the Royal Hotel. This is essentially a cultural landscape. In it, Nolan begins to develop his imagery of iron-laced pubs and spade-bearded settlers, humanising the landscape experience. But despite their differences, these works share a single quality: Nolan's extraordinary capacity to render what Cynthia Nolan once called a land as flat as a strap and flooded by the light of dreams. That most important aspect of Whiteley's painting, its sensuality, or even its explicit sexuality. Here we see the artist rejoicing in the curve of breasts, of hips, of thighs, and the erotic flow and twist of the body is echoed in the shapes of the bentwood chair behind. Of course, that's not all. With Whiteley, more is always more. The painting contains subtle references to paintings by Pablo Picasso and Henri Matisse. On the wall behind the figure, you can see a beautiful Whiteleyan landscape, and there is even an intimate autobiographical detail with Whiteley's little Aussie terrier sitting beneath the chair. Golden light is typical of the artist's late paintings. McCubbin had all his life been an admirer of the great English painter J.M.W. Turner, and the experience of seeing Turner in London in the flesh had a considerable impact. In this work's subtle, delicate, chromatic and tonal balances, and in the liveliness of its surface, with its touches of palette knife and brush, he conveys homage to the great master of golden light.
If you are the one who love to travel to Australia, the next video is the best way to you to know the real worth of Australia.
Property prices continue to rise in Sydney as it experiences yet another year of being in a housing crisis. But this hasn't stopped buyers or large numbers of people migrating to the city. So what makes life in Sydney so attractive to the thousands who flock to the New South Wales capital every year despite high living expenses? Experts and local Australians make Sydney the highest populated city in the entire country, and they're drawn to everything the city has to offer, including education and a strong workforce. Because of this, Sydney is a cultural melting pot. Though there is no official language and many Sydney-siders, yes, they're called City-siders, do speak Australian English, more than 250 languages are spoken there, from Arabic in the western suburbs to Mandarin and Cantonese on the northern shores. Because of the recent increase in population, the northern part of Sydney is experiencing overcrowding in many classrooms. Schools originally designed to educate just 450 students now struggle to accommodate a burgeoning student body, and high attendance doesn't stop there. In recent years, Sydney has been experiencing criticism towards the mass marketing of academic degrees. While more Australians are attending university, many argue this has affected the quality of education, tarnishing the prestige of the degree itself. Some have even started calling them MIC degrees, widely available and worth very little. Whatever the quality of the education system, Sydney does have a robust workforce, as Australia is one of the most economically stable countries in the world, despite the global financial crisis. New South Wales alone accounts for almost a third of Australia's GDP. In fact, many migrate to Australia because of career opportunities. The unemployment rates are low and jobs for skilled workers are plentiful. Another attractive quality to working in Sydney is the positive work environment and amazing work-life balance. Most working Australians get 28 paid vacation days. One expat explained he moved from Florida because of this. He observed that his office actively tracks vacation days to ensure he has regular breaks, and explained people leave and engage in their real lives without fearing any repercussion from being away from the office. But while Australians do enjoy a fair share of vacation time, back at home, Sydney is actually one of the most expensive cities in the world. Now, this is partially due to a number of factors, including a high minimum wage, but also their geographical location. For example, Australians pay more for technology and online entertainment because of geo-blocking, a policy restricting access to content based on location. Basically, they're so far away from everyone that it just costs more to get stuff to them. For example, if you want to download an album from iTunes, prepare to spend $3 more than you would in places like the US or UK. But this doesn't stop Australians from enjoying their life there. Why would it? The emblematic images of rich sunsets and pristine beaches are true. Sydney's diverse population makes this city rich in culture, from the well-known Sydney Opera House to energetic festivals and parades. It becomes clear to see why Sydney-siders, no matter where they're originally from, decide to stay. If you're curious to know more about this part of the world, check out this video on the Maori people of New Zealand, one of Australia's closest allies.
First arriving in the 1200s from Polynesia, the Maori people were isolated for centuries, which facilitated the development and protection of their unique.
And the last video is very important to you if you are the one who interested to work with Australian people.
Just a 20-hour plane ride away in the southern hemisphere are two amazing countries known as Australia and New Zealand. Though they are seemingly a world away from our own, these cultures both speak English and have many similarities to our own that open the door for many business opportunities. Many people don't realize that Australia is nearly the same size as the United States, while New Zealand is a country made up of two small islands just to the southeast of Australia. In this presentation, I will help you to understand the appropriate ways to conduct business in both of these beautiful countries. Doing business in Australia, it's really important to focus on honesty, brevity, and directness. Aussies, as they call themselves, value material progress as well as time to enjoy family culture in the beautiful country that they inhabit. They strive to attain a healthy balance of both business and play in their daily lives. In doing business with Aussies, it's really important to remember that their geographically isolating position in the world doesn't intimidate them at all. They're very comfortable negotiating and conducting business via email, phone, or web conferencing. If you do decide to travel to Australia in order to meet face-to-face with your prospective clients, be sure to arrive on time, early if possible, and avoid traveling down under during the peak native vacation times of December through February. Since they have opposite seasons to the U.S., these months include their summer, and many families will be on holiday, as that's their term for vacation. When meeting them for the first time, a firm handshake with direct eye contact is the best. Introductions including hello and how are you are best, as the term g'day is not used as much as in previous years because some Aussies view this term as quite disrespectful and stereotypical of their culture, as many tourists say this phrase. Aussies are generally a casual people outside of the office, with conservative dress being typical for executives visiting Australia. When meeting people for the first time, full names should be used, but this typically will shift to a first name basis rather quickly. Gifts are usually not given in the business context, but small talk is customary before the start of a business conversation, as Aussies value business relationships. Good topics of conversation include sports and the beauty of their country. It's best to avoid politics, as they feel very passionately about these topics and the conversation could quickly shift to a heated debate. They are a friendly people and they dislike wordiness in business negotiations, and they very much dislike individuals who appear boastful or consider themselves on a higher level than others. Aussies may also mock individuals who present themselves as a quote-unquote walking resume, not knowing how to allow your accomplishments to truly speak for themselves. Never attack Australians with pressuring sales tactics with too many details or roundabout negotiations, as they greatly value directness in business, and this will emphasize the good and the bad of the venture at hand, so be honest with them. Americans conducting business in Australia will find that it is less foreign than you might think, despite that 22-hour trip that makes you feel like you ventured into
For
another.
your attention. Goodbye.